Hello everyone. Update 39 just released on August 21st and will release on console for September 5th. Most of the changes were quality of life and bug fixes. However, there are a few adjustments to combat as well. Today I'll be going over the most relevant changes for U39 because if I went over every single change, I'd be here all day, you'd be here all day, and neither of us have time for that. So starting off with some of the changes to new players, I'm not going to read everything on the list here, but ZOS has made some changes that should help prevent new players from becoming overwhelmed with the sheer amount of quest dropping upon just starting. I'm not sure if these levels will be enough as it doesn't typically take that long to reach even level 15, but let's hope I'm wrong and it does actually improve the experience of new folks coming into ESO. Next up, ZOS has made a few changes to prevent you from looting event tickets while close to or at the 12 ticket cap. They have put a few barriers in place before that warned you about turning in quests with insufficient space, but there was nothing stopping you from looting bosses and the like. Starting with Undaunted Celebration, the Witches Festival, and events afterwards, you will now receive a message stating that you don't have enough room to pick up the event tickets. This is a great change because even sometimes I forget to spend my tickets and I end up picking up nothing and then I can't get them for the rest of the day. So hopefully this is a benefit for everybody. Next up we have some new Cyrodiil monster masks. We have three new Cyrodiil monster masks that are being released and the masks and shoulders can be purchased from the Elite Gear vendor in three new containers for 50,000 AP each, and style pages can be purchased from the War Researcher vendor as individual pages for 150k AP each. While I haven't tested these sets out in Cyrodiil yet, as it's nearly impossible to test out PvP on the PTS outside of dueling, I do plan to test these out on live. So let's start with Draw Mountain's War Chief. The first item set bonus gives you 129 weapon and spell damage, and the second item bonus is dealing damage applies a stack of Malady to your enemy, reducing heal and taken by 1% for 5 seconds up to 35 stacks. You can apply a stack once every 0.5 seconds. Applying Malady gives you a stack of Contagion, reducing healing taken by 1% for 5 seconds up to 15 stacks. You can only gain a stack once every 1 second. Now this set could be useful while trying to take out tanky targets or rely on self-healing such as block builds and healers, but it does come with that drawback that you will take up to 15% less healing taken, so do keep that in mind. Next up we have Nibene Bay Battle Reeve. The first item set bonus is 424 critical resistance, and when you are forcefully removed via pull, knockback, or teleportability, you gain a damage shield that absorbs up to 15 112 damage for 6 seconds. This damage is not affected by Battle Spirit, and this effect can occur once every 14 seconds. While you do not have the damage shield from this set, reduce your damage taken from players by 5%. Now this set is going to be quite useful when you're up against ball groups that depend on sets like Dark Convergence or Rush of Agony to group up enemies to cleave them down. I do think that this set's going to be more useful in a group setting where all of your group is wearing this monster helm, because if you're the only one wearing it, you may survive the initial hit of the ball group, but Vicious Death or Occult Overload is probably going to clean you up pretty quickly. Moving on to Colovian Highlands General, the first item set bonus gives you 1487 offensive penetration, and the second item set bonus is when you kill a player, you gain a stack of blood debt for 0.5 seconds. When blood debt expires, you and up to 5 group members within 28 meters of you gain 15 ultimate per stack of blood debt. Now this set is interesting because it is a group-wide ultimate gain, and with passives such as Combat Frenzy already giving you 20 ultimate per player kill, it does beg the question on if we are going to see a change coming to Combat Frenzy in the future. I would not be surprised because it is already a pretty strong passive, and changing Combat Frenzy would actually significantly reduce the amount of bombing, or at least prevent it from being so easily accessible. But we'll see how that changes for the future. Going along with that, PvP now has some new face and body markings that you can pick up for 100,000 AP each, and they do require 50 gladiator proofs to combine. You can pick up gladiator proofs by completing conquest missions, and you can only get one a day. Next up, we have some improved Imperial City treasure scamp loot. Now, cunning scamps will now reward a greatly increased quantity of Telvar stones, and it is not multiplied by Imperial City Telvar multiplier. Just a reminder here that the Cunning Scamp rewards that drop when you loot it, you don't have to loot it right away, or open the coffer rather. You can wait until you're safe inside the base so that way you don't lose half of it if you die on your way back to base. Trove Scamps will now drop a tradable piece of Imperial City gear in addition to their previous rewards. Item sets that will be dropped are as follows: Black Rose, Galerian's Revenge, Imperial Physique, Meritorious Service, Phoenix, Powerful Assault, Reactive Armor, Shieldbreaker, Fuse of the Harbinger, and Vice Cannon of Venom. They've also gone ahead and lowered the achievements for these scamps, which is going to be a very nice change as it is kind of a pain in the ass to try to get 100 kills on these things. Now you only have to kill up to 10 for the maximum achievement. Next up, we have some changes to how you gain sets from Cyrodiil. So Rewards of the Worthy will continue to have the newest item sets, and as new item sets are added, older sets will be removed from the Rewards of the Worthy and added into other sources, including Cyrodiil Delves, Domens, board missions, daily quests, town merchants, and elite gear vendors. There are also changes to the elite gear vendors, so town merchants will have a discount price of 10k AP, and elite gear vendors have a higher price of 20k AP, so make sure that you're going to those town merchants. And then, of course, there's also how things will drop. So town daily quests and town merchants will actually be divided up by light, medium, and heavy, with the exception of some of these, which will reward any set. Jewelry will now drop from Domens, Delves will drop waist feet items, and board missions will drop all other armor piece. So bounty and scout missions will reward armor pieces from a new container, and battle and warfront missions will reward weapon slot pieces. We also had some changes to Craglorn trials. So now instead of every single set dropping from any of those trials, it has been streamlined so that Arthurian Archive drops Defending Warrior, Healing Mage, Infallible Mage, and Quick Serpent. Hellraw Citadel will now drop Berserking Warrior, Destructive Mage, Eternal Warrior, and Poisonous Serpent. Sanctum Ophidia will now drop Immortal Warrior, Twice Fang Serpent, Vicious Serpent, and the Wise Mage. Finally, regarding changes to item set itemization, Hughesbane and Gold Coast has received basically the same treatment as every other zone when it comes to dropping mechanics. Hands, waist, and feet will drop from delves, and head, chest, and legs will drop from world bosses. Next up, we have unifying unsellable items. So we made a few changes to certain items to allow for better understanding surrounding what can and cannot be sold. These changes should make the experience of selling items significantly more consistent and clearer. So any item that is listed as 0 gold in your inventory cannot be sold. Certain items that were previously listed as 0 gold in your inventory but could still be sold to merchants will now be valued at 1 gold. Items impacted by this change include weapons and armor picked up directly from clickable items throughout the environment, certain crafting materials, low-level provisioning food and drink, lockpicks, and items found in the tutorial. We also had some changes to housing that is going to be really great for those of us that do some housing. So placing furnishings, you can now place them directly from your inventory and collection screen. You don't actually have to go and find them. Furnishing preview placement, so now you can actually preview items from the purchase tab of the housing editor. So that way you're not guessing at how big something is or how it will look in your area. You can actually just preview it, place it down, see if you like it, and make your purchase decision on that. All right, now we're getting into the changes regarding the classes. Now, a lot of the classes mainly just got bug fixes, but DKs did actually get a few nerfs and a few buffs. Nightblade's got a few buffs, Sorcerer's got a few buffs, so let's go ahead and get into the Combustion passive for the DK. Reduce the damage bonus from this passive, that this passive provides to burning and poison status effects to 33%, down from 50%. The developer comment reads as follows: Dragon Knights are currently a bit ahead of many other classes in damage production. To address this, we're easing some of their passive power to reel them slightly back to their classes without stirring the pot too drastically. Now, they are correct in saying that Dragon Knights are performing quite well. Ever since the Arcanist, though, I mean, Arcanist with Velothir Mage is still hitting quite hard. Um, while I don't think that this passive was really necessary, um, is what it is. You're probably not going to actually feel that much of a DPS nerf. DKs are still hitting quite hard. Next up, we have a change to Green Dragon Blood. So this morph now adds a small heal over time, lasting 5 seconds, and scaling off your max health. This morph no longer increases its duration by 1 second for every rank, but rather ranks up the healing done of the healing over time. So this passive now is actually going to be used on our Dragon Knight tank build on the website. There's going to be a link in the video description if you want to check that out. But Green Dragon Blood, with the change, it doesn't actually scale off of missing max health. It actually just scales off of your maximum health, which is much, much better. It's way more consistent. And the burst heal is still there if you need it. And then that extra heal over time feels really nice as well. I'm going to put a tooltip on the screen right now as what it looks like on my DK build right now. Next up, we have some buffs to Necromancer. We have reduced the cost of the ultimate and its morphs down to 175, down from 225, so that's a 50 ultimate reduction. Increase the damage per hit of all versions by approximately 11%. So Pestilent Colossus morph now always guarantees the disease status effect on each hit, and the Glacial Colossus morph now extends the duration of major vulnerability to 17 seconds per hit, up from 12. So now the Necromancer tank build on the website is actually using Drake's Rush to quickly build ultimate, because with this change to the Colossus, you can get this thing back so fast, especially with Drake's Rush, that really Turning Tide in most cases, we do not need it. Of course, Turning Tide is still a fantastic set to have on hand. If you're still using it on the Necro Tank build and you can't get Drake's Rush, again, still a fantastic choice, and it's going to be still great to use on all other classes. Moving on to Deaden Pain, this morph now also increases duration of its effects, granted to 4 seconds per corpse consumed, up from 2. So effectively what this means is the heal over time and the major protection buff now lasts twice as long per corpse when you consume one, which is a fantastic buff because major protection gained from this skill was kind of awkward. It didn't really last long enough, especially during ad fights when you only have, or rather boss fights, when you only have your armor and your spirit guardian to gain corpses from. Now it's going to be, 4 seconds, it's going to be 8 seconds. Next up, we have some buffs to the Nightblade, starting with Grim Focus. This ability and its morphs no longer need to be activated to generate stacks, as they will now generate stacks anytime you meet their original requirements, simply by slotting the ability on either bar. So what this effectively means is that you don't actually have to cast Grim Focus anymore to start being able to generate stacks. Just slotting the ability on either one of your bars and light attacking will actually start generating stacks, and then you can cast it when you reach max stacks. So increase the cost of the special activate to 1890, up from 1350, to make up for the fact that you no longer need to activate the buff portion of these abilities. These abilities now use consistent naming and icons rather than having separate names for the active versus stacking portions. Updated the tooltip to mention that the fully charged heavy attack grants double stacks, and these abilities will now highlight on your ability bar when you're at full stacks rather than becoming different icons. Now specifically, the Relentless Focus morph has had increased weapon and spell damage to 80 per stack, rather than increasing the duration of the buff, since the buff no longer has a duration. And the morph now costs 1377 rather than 1148. Moving on to the Shadow Cloak skill. This ability and Shadowy Disguise Morph now also grant major savagery and prophecy for slotting on either bar to help them offer more functionality outside of PvP and to ensure the ability still offers something when they are being countered. That being said, now that this actually applies major savagery and prophecy on both bars, this is definitely a buff to PvP Nightblades, and for that matter, PvE Nightblades, being able to get major savagery and prophecy just by slotting this even on your back bar and just not bothering with it up on the front bar, definitely good to see. That being said, Camouflaged Hunter still exists, so we'll see how it plays out. Now the Dark Cloak morph now swaps the major savagery and prophecy to minor protection for slotting on either bar, rather than granting it for 10 seconds after casting the ability. Moving on to the Veiled Strike skill, Surprise Attack has had its cooldown reduced of the guaranteed critical strike on this morph to 3 seconds, down from 4, and Concealed Weapon. This morph now grants Major Berserk for 7 to 10 seconds based on the rank rather than a unique 7 to 10% damage done when meeting its conditions. Moving on to the Sorcerer, now Bound Armor is getting the same treatment as Grim Focus, so this ability and its morphs now grant their passive bonuses on both bars while slotted, rather than only the bar they are actively slotted on. This ability and the Bound Aegis morph now passively grant their minor protection while slotted, rather than the duration after casting, and increase the base magicka granted to 8% of the base ability rather than having each morph rank up to 8% separately. Now that being said, Bound Aegis actually gives you minor protection, that max magicka increase, and minor resolve. It's not mentioned here, but minor resolve is also passively slotted, or passively granted while slotted. And the Sorcerer Tank build on the website, this is definitely a must-have for that now, as you can slot it on your back bar, and you still gain the benefit from that minor protection, minor resolve, and that max mag increase. Now the Bound Armaments morph, this ability no longer needs to be activated to be eligible to generate bound weapons, and instead will generate a bound weapon whenever you light or heavy attack with the ability slotted on either bar. And just like Grim Focus, heavy attacking will actually give you 2 charges of the weapon rather than only 1. And this ability activation now requires you to have at least 1 bound armor to activate. Additionally, highlights when you have all 4 bound weapons, and that'll just improve clarity. Now moving on to some of the weapon changes. Long shots. This passive now increases your damage done by 5% against enemies within 15 meters of you, and increases your critical chance by 13-14 against enemies that are further than 15 meters away from you, rather than increasing your damage done with bow attacks by 12% based on how far away you are. So this is going to be a lot more consistent and will play really well in PvE and PvP. And they also renamed the passive to Vine Dust Training to accurately adjust to its implications with a new flavorful lore twist. Now moving on to the Destruction Staff. Ancient Knowledge passive. The Flame Staff now increases your damage done with status effects and damage over time effects by 6 to 12%, rather than increasing your single target damage by 5 to 10%. The Lightning Staff passive now increases your damage done with direct damage and channeled effects by 12%, rather than increasing your area of effect damage by 5 to 10%. Next up in the Destruction Staff passives, we have Penetrating Magic. Now this passive now causes your Destruction Staff attacks to ignore 1487 or 2974 spell resistance rather than a 10% of the target spell resistance. Now, a developer comment here reads, due to the ease of access of potent armor shredding effects like Major Breach, percent-based penetration frequently feels extremely weak, so we're converting this to be a flat offer to some guaranteed consistent power. Now, the dev note is absolutely correct. In most organized groups, percent-based penetration just isn't going to do much for you. Major Breach, Minor Breach, Alkosh if used, Crusher and Chance, all of this is going to lower the armor so much that 10% really isn't going to matter. So with that flat amount, it's going to just be better, and it's probably going to be a lot more consistent. That being said, it only affects Destruction Staff attacks, so you're definitely going to still have to build for penetration through light armor class passives, depending on which abilities you use. Next up, we have Trifocus. Flame staves are now going to apply a damage over time equal to the power of a standard damage over time effect over 20 seconds with a fully charged heavy attack, rather than increasing the damage done of your fully charged heavy attacks by 12%. Ice staves are now going to have a 33% of your max health damage shield, up from 25%, and lightning staves, the passive will now only trigger on fully charged heavy attacks rather than any tick of the heavy attack. So overall, lightning staves this patch should do better in terms of single target damage this patch in most cases, but with the change to Trifocus and Ancient Knowledge, many heavy attack builds will probably need to start using a AoE ability during ad fights to contribute towards cleave damage. I wish that they would have left this passive alone, but it will probably get another rework in the future anyway, if I'm being honest, because they are watching feedback, and this particular pass of the passive really hasn't um, done any favors to the heavy attack community, and they are quite outspoken about it. I know I said that I wasn't going to cover many bug fixes here, but this one here is worth actually mentioning. So the weakness to element skill, specifically the elemental susceptibility morph, fix an issue where the concuss and chilled status effects applied from this morph could be treated as damage over time in some cases and could fail to interact with sets such as Baron's Odrus. Now with this change here, uh, I'm really hoping that Baron's Odrus is going to become much more viable for many PvP builds, especially since elemental susceptibility is already such a strong skill and a staple for many classes to apply major breach and that dot pressure. So we're going to give this a shot and really see how well it does against something like Bloodspawn for ulti building. Hoping that I can put together a comparison video in the future, but I got a lot of content in the pipeline, so we'll see if that makes it out or not. Let me know in the comments if you do want to see something like that, and maybe I'll bump it up in the pipeline. Now moving on to Twin Blade and Blunt from the dual wield skill line. So they have reduced the passes on this or reduce the bonus on this passive to ensure it is in line with other adjustments being made to weapon passives. So effectively what they've done here is they standardize weapon passives to be in line with 2 to 4 set bonuses from set items. It's certainly a nerf, but not something that you should really notice. The nerf to dagger is only about 0.7% drop in crit chance per dagger, so really, honestly, not that big of a change. Heavy weapons passive from the two-hand skill line is getting the same treatment, except it's just going to be double the one-hand counterpart as usual. Same thing goes with the enchantments. So maces are now going to give you 2974 offensive penetration, and swords will now give you 258 weapon and spell damage. Continuing with the two-handers, the follow-up passive now increasing your damage done with all two-handed attacks by 10% for 4 seconds after completing a fully charged heavy attack, rather than increasing the damage of your next direct damage ability by 10% after completing a fully charged heavy attack. Now, the change to follow up is quite interesting, as it does have some potential to bring about some more burst options for PvP, especially with sets like Deadlands Assassins and Marsalog already being great heavy attack sets in PvP. Trying to keep this up in PvE, however, is a minigame that I really don't have any interest in. 4 seconds really isn't a long time, so it's really just burst damage potential here. Moving on to some ability altering. So Merciless Charge has gotten a rework. It no longer actually applies the bleed as it used to, but the set now increases your damage done with direct damage attacks by 9.3% of your weapon or spell damage up to a maximum of 560, rather than causing enemies to bleed over 10 seconds when they are damaged by critical charge. So the change made to Merciless Charge should do quite well with classes that have a lot of direct damage, such as a Stamsork, but in terms of just using it on every class as a backbar ability, I don't really think that it has as much relevance there, but we will see. So moving on to the changes made to dungeon and arena sets. Now there was a few changes and bug fixes that went on here, but the most notable one here is Azure Reaper. This set's damage explosion now only happen once every half seconds rather than having no cooldown. The targets no longer become immune to stacks for 2 seconds after reaching the full stack count, and reduce the damage of the explosion by approximately 15%. but the damage now increases by 30% for each enemy hit, up to a maximum of 180 bonus damage. Now, even though Azurblight can no longer crit, I'm hoping that with paired with Malakath, there's some potential for heavy burst damage with classes that have a lot of dots in their toolkit, such as DK. Moving on to some PvP source sets. Now, finally, Elfbane fixed an issue where this set was increasing the duration of some siege weaponry effects. So, effectively, what was happening before this patch was people were able to wear Elfbane, set down a Coldfire Ballista, and if you got hit with it, the dot from the Coldfire Ballista lasted an additional 5 seconds. That can no longer be done. Now, moving on to some PvP quests. So you will now only see your kill enemy player quest counter increment when you have contributed to a kill or dealt the killing blow, and the conquest board kill players group is now shared through the entire group. And to counterbalance the rapid progress of this quest during PvP engagements, the number of kills required has been increased from 40 to 150. So it's going to take a little bit longer to get. And finally, a change I just wanted to note here, that they fixed an issue with the activity finder where queuing for a dungeon in the activity finder could sometimes have members desync from the group. So what would happen is you would queue as a group, and some of your team members would get in while you were left behind at wherever, and you would have to actually travel to them in the dungeon to party up with them. Uh, so allegedly, Zos fixed this, but again, Activity Finder is so buggy. We'll see whether or not it actually makes a difference. Alright then, that's all for this video. Thank you all for watching. If you enjoyed the video, go ahead and subscribe and leave a like and a comment. Check out the website, follow me over on Twitch. Links are in the video description. Take care, and I'll see y'all next time.